I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are excited to have you all for our third from last. We have 2 more sessions after this. The next one will be on rain barrels. We're going to do a demonstration on how to build a rain barrel. I think we're going to pre-record that, but beyond why rain barrels, more information on them. And then the last session for June will be on composting, and Jessica will be teaching that one. That'll be a great class as well. So hopefully you've signed up for that. And if not, you still have time. So if you could put your name in the chat box, and then if you have any questions along the way through the presentation, don't hesitate to go ahead and type those in as you're thinking of them, and then we'll get to them at the end. So today we have Ray Tackett, who is the horticulture agent in Bourbon County, and he will be presenting on lawn care, lower input lawn care. So Ray, I will let you take it away.
All righty, thank you very much, Faye. Environmentally friendly lawn care. Get my screen set up here real quick. Environmentally friendly lawn care, or what I sometimes call lower input lawn care, is different for every single person. And normally I would start out this presentation with a discussion with the group to see what your definition of environmentally friendly or lower input lawn care is. So this makes it a tougher thing for me because everybody's definition literally is different. That's why I like to put in there when I'm talking about environmentally friendly lawn care, lower input, not no input, because you're always going to, typically you're going to have to have some kind of inputs. If you have a lawn that you mow, mowing is an input. So we're always going to have some kind of inputs if we have a green space around our homes. Not always. If you're out far west, you may have what's called a xeriscape. That's a drought type landscape that you may do very, very little maintenance on throughout the year. But even those type of landscapes, those western desert landscapes, and green spaces, they take some input. So today what we're going to talk about is a lawn that you're going to be trying to reduce as much as possible inputs into that lawn, whether that input be a fertilizer or mowing or grass selection or pest, whatever that be, is reducing those inputs and still making that lawn meet your expectations. And that's really what the discussion is about today, because everybody is at a different spot in what they expect from your home lawn. Obviously, if you expect a perfectly uniform lawn that has no weeds and is at a very uniform color and mowing height, you're going to have probably more inputs to accomplish those goals. Now, if you are of the mindset that green is good, and if a weed is green, that's good, because if it's green is good, then if that meets your expectations, that's fine too, because my definition of a home lawn is a little different. It's one that meets your expectations. Now, that would be different if I was working with a golf course. They have a different set of expectations and needs. But whatever your expectations are as a homeowner, that's the right expectations. But different expectations, we require different inputs. But what the presentation is mainly going to be focused on today is, I guess, for lack of a better word, is best management practices to, in general, have reasonably good grass. And then we'll talk about weed control kind of on more of an individual basis. But that's the sort of the presentation today, is meeting your expectations with minimal inputs. And that also just happens to be, I think, environmentally friendly, especially as we deal with things like fertility management with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in particular, the big nutrients. Before we get started with the specifics of the program today, I always like to start with the seasonal growth curve so that we're all on the same page as to when most of our lawns grow the best. I say most of our lawns because most lawns that I personally work with as a county extension agent, they're cool season lawns, whether they be bluegrass or tall fescue, one of the tall fescues. Every now and again, I'll run into a warm season grass that grows better in the summer, like zoysia grass or Bermuda grass. I'll run into a few of those lawns across the county, not very many. For the most part, this entire presentation today, we're going to be talking about cool season grasses. And cool season grasses do most of their shoot development and root development at 2 time periods during the year, the fall and winter. And during the summer is when our cool season grasses, they develop less shoots, they slow their growth rate, and they develop less roots because of higher temperatures, and just overall they're in a condition of standing where they don't do a lot of growth in the summer, or they don't do nearly the amount of growth that they do during the cooler seasons of the month, which is spring and fall. So that's our cool season grasses. That's a seasonal growth curve, and you can just kind of look at that for what root growth happened in the spring and fall with most of our fescue based lawns, and that's what the presentation is going to be on today. Now, if there's a couple of you guys that have warm season grasses, be sure to point that out so that we can kind of tailor some of the recommendations during the question and answer to those lawns, because they're different. Warm season grasses do most of their growing in the summer, their best growing. I wanted to start out with some things that I commonly see, that I've seen over the years as I make site visits, homeowner visits, and observe things. But lawns that suffer most during the summer drought. Now remember, you have a cool season lawn. We're talking about cool season lawns mostly today. You have a cool season lawn. It's gonna be most stressed in the summer hot months, where it's a little drier, a lot hotter. And these are some of the things that's going to make your lawn have issues. It's things that I've seen the most. But growing on shallow or heavy clay soils, that's a tough condition for your lawn, because it really impacts root growth, and anything that impacts root growth is going to cause your lawn to have issues. I see that if lawns are not irrigated and they are on a slope, specifically a south or west facing slope, what that means is that it's going to be hotter and drier. Now, fescue roots are notorious. It's a great lawn grass. It is my favorite. I'll just say that up front. The different turf top tall fescues, I think, are the best option for Kentucky lawns, particularly those lawns that are under lower maintenance. And that's what the presentation today is. It's all about lower maintenance. But those tall fescues, their roots almost stop development when it's hot and dry. And if you have a south or west facing slope, it's going to be hotter and drier than other sections of your lawn. So it's not uncommon for me to go out to a lawn. Different portions of the lawn look great except for those sloped areas, and they will look more dead, more brown, more like a drought condition than other sections of the lawn. I see that time and again. The next point that I see sometimes is that if you mow your lawn at a lower mowing height, that's going to impact your lawn in a huge way. And we'll talk about that at several points in the presentation today. If you mow below the optimum mowing height in the summer, your lawn is going to show that. The roots aren't going to be as deep, and it's going to have more issues of thinning and dying over a lawn that's mowed higher. We'll talk a great deal about that. Lawns that receive weed control products applied during drought. In fact, if you read weed control products, if you're putting down, let's say, a broadleaf weed control, some of those products will specifically say, do not put this on in dry, hot conditions. Don't put it on. So that's why it's so important. There's multiple reasons to read the label very carefully if you ever have an occasion to put down a lawn herbicide. But some of those will specifically say it's going to stress your lawn if it's hot and dry, so don't do that. Not only is it going to stress your lawn, you're not going to get effective weed control, because weeds aren't growing very well, and they're not going to have chemical uptake to control those weeds anyhow. So read your labels carefully. That's going to be a stressor, a big stressor on your home lawn if you apply these herbicides when it's hot and dry. And I see that a lot. Drought stress lawns that are mowed during the heat of the day, that can also add additional stress. If you have your choice, mow early in the morning or late in the evening. And this damage that can possibly take place on a drought stress lawn is increased even more if you haven't sharpened your mower blades. And I'll have a slide on that, how very important it is to sharpen your mower blades at least once a year. But that damage is even greater if it's hot and dry and you mow during the heat of the day. With a dull mower blade, you can do significant damage to cool season grass lawns. And I see that. especially in parks, park scenario, commercial park scenario, where that you have hourly workers and they have to basically mow during the day because they're not there in the evenings. So I see that a lot in municipal situations and setups like parks. I see that probably more so than even home lawns, but I also see that damage on home lawns from mowing when it's hot, above 90 degrees. Growing in the shade where the grass must compete with tree roots. A lot of times we think of grass growing under trees as thinning out because of the shade, but that's not the only factor. Not only is that lawn grass competing with sunlight with the tree, competing for sunlight, but it's also competing for moisture. So it's not uncommon to see grass to thin out under trees for two reasons. First is shade, of course. We know that because it's much drier under those trees because the tree is a large plant, large perennial plant basically, and it takes up a tremendous amount of moisture that's available that would be otherwise available for that lawn grass. And areas that receive high traffic by children, pets, equipment, whatever. All of that traffic is the same as mowing during the middle of the day, especially if your lawn kind of feels crunchy. If your lawn grass is hot and dry, the weather's been hot and dry, and your grass kind of feels crunchy, it feels different, you know that it's a good time that if you can limit traffic, do so. If the surface of the grass is thinned or eliminated, this is something we miss a lot, and it's an important concept for the presentation today. It's a big one, folks. But if the surface cover of grass is thinned or eliminated, direct sunlight will get to the surface and increase the grass growing point temperature by as much as 30 degrees. And what that means for a cool season grass is that it shuts down root development. And if you shut down root development, you're going to see drought stress a whole lot quicker. So basically, if you have a thin lawn, not a lot of grass there, and you can see a lot of open soil, that soil is going to be hotter and drier. Not only are you going to increase weed pressure, but you're going to increase the temperature of the soil a lot. And that's one of the reasons we see weeds around places like sidewalks, concrete and asphalt. That's a hotter and drier area. And that grass is not, cool season grasses aren't going to do really well beside those areas because it's hot and dry and you'll have weed pressure coming in. And I think I have a slide or two on that. But you're always going to have issues around those hot, dry areas of getting grass to grow, not just because it's dry, but because of the heat. Remember, we're talking about cool season grasses today. So that's going to cause an issue every single year here in Kentucky with our cool season lawns. And lawns that become heavily infested with our favorite weed, crabgrass, and other summer-loving weeds that just simply outcompete the turf when there is hot, dry conditions. We're thinking of things like Johnson grass and crabgrass and all the other grasses that just love that hot, dry weather, and our cool season grasses aren't growing well then, and they simply get outcompeted. Other common causes of general home lawn issues is, and this is the first one, is a huge one, and that's heavy nitrogen fertilizer, specifically nitrogen at the wrong time of year. We'll talk more about that in a slide or two. Poor drainage, that'll cause shallow root systems, and when it does finally dry up, if you have poor drainage, you will have shallow roots because the roots will not go down into that waterlogged area because they cannot get oxygen. And what that means is if that area does eventually dry out, you're going to have shallow roots that are going to struggle when it gets dry, if it does get dry. This next one is kind of not one of the big ones I see a lot, but I do occasionally, and that's heavy thatch. Now, we're talking today about low input lawn care. Typically, I see heavy thatch on lawns that are irrigated and fertilized 4+ times per year. Not only that, but I've never personally seen a thatch issue on a tall fescue or a turf type fescue lawn. Heavily maintained lawns that are in bluegrass is where I see thatch, where there's a high management, almost a golf course scenario. That's where I see thatch, and we'll talk about that more in a second. Areas that are compacted, roots cannot penetrate into that compaction layer oftentimes, which leads to a shallow root system. You kind of see a theme with my comments here. with shallow roots, whether from poor drainage or compaction. Shallow roots means your lawn's going to thin out and struggle more than a lawn that has deeper roots. Short mowing height, which guess what, results in a shallow root system, because the shorter you mow, the more shallow your roots tend to be. pH issues, that's high pH. If you apply too much lime, you can do just as much damage as if your lawn was, an acid lawn. So you want to have your pH within a range. Basically, what I'll say there, and I'll say multiple times during the presentation, is take a soil test. You need to know the pH of your lawn before you apply something like lime. You need to know what the specific pH is and have a reason for doing so, because if you apply too much lime, you can cause more problems than not applying any lime at all. Root injury, just general root injury from pests or chemicals. Remember, those lawn weed control chemicals can also do damage to your lawn, including the roots. Or if you have pests like grubs is the classic example that I'll have a little at the end of the presentation. If you've had some trouble with white grubs, that they feed on roots, they can cause some root issues that usually in tall fescue lawns, that's not a big issue. And just simply high temperatures. When the temperatures get really high, cool season grass lawns shut down, and sometimes that can cause your lawn to thin if the roots aren't where they need to be as far as depth in the soil. But which grass? If you're trying to establish a low input lawn in Kentucky or manage a low input lawn, you have first of all a couple of choices. You have cool season grasses on the left here, and on the right you have warm season grasses. I'll just tell you that I don't see a lot of warm season grasses in Kentucky. Why? Why do we not see more Bermuda grass and zoysia grass lawns? Because they are very resistant to drought. They're very resistant to foot traffic. They do well in our summers. But I guess what is their strength? The fact that they're a warm season grass and they do well in drought also means they don't do so well in our winters, in that they go dormant for a large portion of the year here in Kentucky. So basically what I recommend for most Kentucky lawns is one of the turf top tall fescues. You can use bluegrass, and I do see some bluegrass lawns, but and bluegrass does have some advantages, but in most scenarios where you're not going to do a lot of maintenance, a lot of fertilization, you're not wanting to do a lot of disease control, I recommend tall fescue. There are some scenarios where a fine fescue, if you have deep shade, may be appropriate. You can work with your local county extension agent in determining that. And there is very limited scenarios where I'd put in like a perennial ryegrass. That's a cool season grass that we have. By and large, the vast majority of time, I recommend a tall fescue for most homeowners that don't want to maintain their home lawn like a golf course and have to use a lot of inputs. Tall fescue, once again, for a lower input lawn, that's my go-to. The thing I wanted to show on this slide is not the brand. That's not an endorsement of the Scott's brand. I just put those up, but to point out the fact that if you're going to put in and seed, whether you're renovating or seeding a brand new lawn, what I look for now is grass seed that's number one, tall fescue, specifically a turf top tall fescue. But I want to look for those turf top tall fescues that have specific qualities. The two grass seeds on the right here, you'll see are two examples of newer varieties. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find university research trials on these two seed mixes, but they're specifically tailored for two qualities. Number one is heat tolerance, and number two is that the one in the lower left is a cool season grass that's specifically formulated for down south, for places like Florida and South Carolina. Now, a few years ago, that would have been impossible or very hard to recommend a cool season grass for Florida, but some of these newer turf fescues do very well at higher temperatures. Their roots go deeper, they're more able to withstand drought better for long periods of time, and they also do something else. I'm starting to see advertisements for cool season turf top fescues that spread a little bit. That's been one of the drawbacks of recommending a turf top tall fescue, is that if you have a hole in your lawn for whatever reason, you have a dead patch, the turf top tall fescues do not spread and fill in holes in your lawn very well. They don't spread and fill in bare areas. Some of the newer varieties are a little bit better about that. They're not as good as bluegrass. They're not as good as Bermuda grass and some of the other grasses, but that is a quality that we're starting to see more and more advertised, is heat tolerant tall fescue and tall fescue that spreads. So if you are going to purchase grass seeds, look for those options. First of all, you want to look on the bag to make sure that the predominant seed in that bag is turf top tall fescue. And the second thing you look for is heat qualities, because that's going to mean you're going to have a lawn that you have to put less input into, because it's going to be a thicker lawn with deeper roots even during dry periods. I'm really looking into those, and I hope the universities around the US do more research trials on those so that we can have, you know, our own data to kind of support those recommendations for specific varieties. A little bit about the best time for seeding lawns. My slide just keeps jumping forward. No idea what button I'm pushing, but by and large, by far the best seeding time is mid-August through late September. And if you're trying to minimize your input, trying to thicken up your home lawn, you really need to focus on that time frame. The second best time is mid-February to mid-March. You can have successful springtime seedings, but just remember, by far the best seeding window for Kentucky for cool season lawns is August through late September. That's when you want to do most of your new lawn seeding and your renovation. And if you're trying to minimize chemical inputs, keep in mind that I think those folks that do the best with very little, let's say, broadleaf weed control, the folks that do best with that are the folks that renovate, or they'll overseed their lawn at least once every 2 to 3 years. It's kind of important, and I'll touch bases on that in just a second. And you can always put down sod. You can put that down almost any time of the year. It's a very expensive option, and you can completely start over and go with sod. That is an option. And you can start out with a relatively weed-free lawn, but it's just an expensive option up front. But it may be something you do for whatever reason. I wanted to leave this slide in there to let you know that if you have a bunch of lawn issues and you have a specific need to quickly get a lawn established, sod can go in just about any time, you know, here in Kentucky, anytime during the year. I just also wanted to include some recommended tall fescue varieties. I don't get personally real caught up on finding specific tall fescue varieties, because most of them are very, very good. The main thing is that the bags say, if I get a point across to you, is that the bags say that it's tall fescue or turf top, because turf top is a type of tall fescue. So don't get confused there, that it's a turf top tall fescue. It's not uncommon for the cheaper seed mixes for home lawns to have annual rye in there. Now, the reason that annual rye is added into those mixes is that it makes us feel good, because annual rye will come up in 3 to 5 days. And that's why, you know, we're impatient as people. We want to see instant results, and annual rye gives you that. The problem with annual rye is it comes up for 1 year and then it goes away, and it can leave more bare spots. So if I am going to do some fall lawn seeding to thicken up my lawn or patch bare spots, I'm just going to look for a straight turf top fescue mix. They'll generally cost more, but it's a better option for you rather than having a lot of annual and perennial rye in there and some of the other grasses, unless you have a specific need for those. Just a straight blend of, usually it's not uncommon to have 2 to 3 different turf fescue varieties in there. That's fine. That's perfectly acceptable in whatever your grass you're looking at, but just make sure it's just straight tall fescue. You're going to pay more, but it's worth more, to be honest. We won't talk a lot about bluegrass because it is higher maintenance here in the state. There's some advantages in the fact that it fills in bare spots. It has rhizomes, so it fills in bare spots better, but it is possible to have thatch problems if it's highly maintained. And the reason I don't recommend straight bluegrass lawns much anymore is that they're not nearly as drought tolerant as our tall fescue mixes. They're not nearly as drought tolerant, and that's one of the reasons I don't recommend. But I wanted you guys to see this. There are some good choices on there. It's just, in most cases, I don't recommend bluegrass lawns as much anymore for homeowners. There's a very important calendar that we have that you can have access through your extension office. And it's basically this entire presentation at a glance today. And I really, really like this, this one-page publication. And it's the turf care calendar for cool season lawns in Kentucky. And you can find it online. You as homeowners can go directly and download that online, and it should look like this. This chart will be at the top of that one-page publication with some notes at the bottom. But quickly at a glance, this is your to-do list for your cool season grass lawn. And the way you read this, you can probably see the details on here. Anything that's in this lighter color, sort of yellowish color, is the second best time to perform any of these activities on the left. You have the activities on the left, and you have, of course, the months across the top here. You have the different months. And anything in green is the best time to perform a particular activity. Now, where are we at right now? We're in these activities. You know, it's June now, so you can quickly look down this chart and see what you need to be during June. If we're talking about low input lawns, you can't skip some of these activities. You need to kind of be mindful of them so that you're giving your lawn grass the best advantage it can have over weeds. That's what the presentation is today, is working for your lawn and against weeds. What usually works for your lawn, such as a fertilizer application at the proper time, that works for your lawn and against weeds, hopefully. But we're here, June through November, so there's still a lot that we can be doing. You know, once again, I can't get feedback from you. We're talking about low input lawn care today, or environmentally friendly lawn care. We're talking about weed control. I mean, there's some of that that's going on, pre and post weed control. Mostly it's post weed control at this point. Most of our pre-emergent weed control takes place earlier in the year. But this is a great chart. Look it up and just kind of keep it handy, and it'll act as a to-do list for your cool season lawns and really keep you on track. And the presentation is going to be, the rest of the slides in this presentation today is going to be organized around this chart. I'll talk a little bit about aerifying, and because it is something that we sometimes look over, and I'll include aerifying, two different operations, aerifying and dethatching. Now, this first slide has to do with dethatching. I won't spend a lot of time on it because most tall fescue lawns in Kentucky don't have a thatch problem. The chemicals that we put on our lawns have changed over time, so they're more environmentally friendly generally to things like earthworms that are decomposers that take care of problems in fescue lawns that would create a condition where there's thatch. If you have a bluegrass lawn, once again, that's highly maintained, you're putting fertilizer on 2, 4, 6 times a year and you're irrigating that, yes. There might be an occasion where you have a thatch problem in a bluegrass lawn. Now, thatch is this layer on your slide. Thatch is this very dense organic layer that basically becomes semi-impenetrable to things like water and nutrients getting down to the soil where it needs to help your lawn grass roots. So you develop this really thick organic layer in some limited scenarios, and it's very hard for moisture and nutrients to penetrate that and get to the soil level. So I don't worry about thatch, but we can do assessments for thatch. We can take a lawn core, and anything that I see here that's less than 1/2 an inch, if I'm, say, working with a golf course or someone that has a really nicely maintained bluegrass lawn, I will take a cutting out of the lawn and I will measure this, and anything that's less than 1/2 inch thatch layer, I don't worry about. We do have a publication that'll give you more details. In fact, the pictures were pulled from that publication, AGR 54. You can learn more about that dethatching a lawn. In most cases, it's not common that I recommend that for homeowners. There are certain reasons that thatch build up. If there's no earthworms present for whatever reason, if you have a really acid soil and bluegrass, if you put down high nitrogen rates, once again, or you just have a straight bluegrass lawn, all of those can be reasons that you might have thatch buildup. Now, if you do decide that, you know, you're working with us, or you determine by some other means that you do need to dethatch, be for sure that you rent the proper dethatcher. There's dethatchers out there that look like they have little springs that almost look like the tines of a rake. Those are not effective in removing the thatch layer. What you need to do is probably, unless you're fortunate and own one of these, there's not too many people that own power dethatchers, but what you're probably going to have to do is go to an equipment rental store and rent a dethatcher that looks something like this underneath. It is specifically designed to remove that heavy organic layer, and you need this machine to do a good job. If you use one of the little rake type dethatchers, they don't do a whole lot, to be honest, and they really don't improve the condition, so just keep that in mind. Now, core aerifying is something a little bit different. It's a method of removing soil cores from the top few inches of soil, 2 to 4 inches of soil. And what it does is redeposit those cores on top of the soil. And there are some specific benefits for aerifying, much more so than dethatching for most home lawns. Particularly those areas, if you have heavily compacted areas, if you have heavy clay soil, you might benefit from core aerifying. And I have a real simple test to determine, if when I'm working with homeowners, determine whether or not you should consider using an aerifier. I'll simply, if I have a pocket knife, just a standard average size pocket knife, pull that out of my pocket and I will stick it into your lawn soil, and I'll take my thumb, just the pressure of one thumb, and push that knife into the soil in several different spots. Now, if I can't use just general thumb pressure to push that knife blade all the way into the soil, I begin to question whether or not that soil is compacted. If I encounter a lot of resistance, you might benefit from core aerifying. And this is an important concept because it's a way that you can improve your lawn, and it can help you with renovating your lawn, because you can seed one after you core aerify them, the seed will fall down into those holes and actually come up and do a surprisingly good job. If you're just overseeding in the fall, specifically if your lawn's heavily compacted, there are several situations where I have recommended core aerifying to homeowners. It can be of benefit. Much so, but don't get core aerifying confused with dethatching. They're completely different. I don't recommend for homeowners dethatching much, but I do recommend some for core aerifying, particularly if you have like a playground area for your kids and they've just really compacted specific areas. You might benefit because it helps water get into the soil. It kind of relieves what we call in turf surface tension, and just generally decreases soil compaction and makes your lawn a better place for grass roots to grow, and can help things like water and nutrients move into the soil. So use that quick test. Take a kitchen knife, pocket knife, whatever you have on you, see if that blade slides easily into the soil. And that's a really quick and simple test to see if you need to work with us in making a better determination if you can benefit from core aerifying. I've not really stressed aerifying much in my presentations, and I'm beginning, to be honest, to do that more and more because of the potential benefits in certain scenarios. This is what your lawn should look like if you use the proper type of machine, a heavy machine that, to be honest, is probably a rental machine. Your lawn's going to look like this. It's going to have these little soil cores spread out all over, but don't worry, after a few rains in the fall time of the year, and that's generally when I do core aerifying, is it's going to be cooler. You're going to get more rains on average that time of year. These are going to quickly go back into your soil with the rain, just natural rain. They're going to disappear in a few weeks. So don't worry about those. It'll look a little messy at first, but then it will go away. Just remember that if you're going to overseed your lawn, this is a great time to do it. We have a real issue with grass seed getting down into the soil, making good contact. Well, every time I use an aerifier, and there's one spot in my backyard that's really compacted, and I need to do that again this year. I did it a couple years ago. I'm going to do it again this fall. And I guarantee you, after I rent that piece of machinery, run it over that soil, I'm going to go back and just overseed then, because I know some of that grass seed is going to fall down into those holes and it's going to come up and do a good job for me. So I accomplished two things at once. I can aerify my lawn and I can overseed. It's a great time to knock out two things at once, and neither one of those things involve a chemical, but it's things that can really improve your lawn. A little bit more about mowing. We just talk and talk a lot about mowing height. And we say mow no more than 1/3 to 1/2 of the leaf blade. I say now, if at all possible, do not remove, and I'll give you specific reasons why in a couple of slides. Don't mow any more than 1/3 of the total leaf blade height off at one time, because it shocks the plant and it can stop root growth. In a nutshell, that's the reason. Mow turf in shady areas even higher. If brown patch is present, we'll sometimes see that in cool season lawns. You can work with your extension office in getting that identified. You can mow at a slightly lower height if you have brown patch, because you want sunlight to get in there and dry that leaf blade quicker, and just trying to get the sunlight in there so you can mow a little bit lower in specific situations like when diseases are present. Do not mow when it's wet. If you do have a disease, you can make it worse. Once again, I've already said this, don't mow when it's above 90 degrees. If you have a choice, mow later in the evenings. That would be best. And keep mower blades sharp. And I have some slides on this, because if you're like me, you're not a believer. You say, yeah, mow your cool season lawns higher, but you never really know why specifically. And I'm going to try to clarify that. Here's some mowing heights for different turf grasses. Of course, tall fescue is primarily what we're talking about today. 3 to 4 inches. Well, what does 3 to 4 inches look like on your average home push mower? On most push mowers, that's either going to be your top setting or your next to top setting on most home push mowers. That's going to be towards the upper range of your lawn height settings to get at the proper height. Now, for some of you guys that have been mowing more like 2 to 3 inches, it may look a little weird at first mowing your lawn higher, but I can assure you this chart to the right kind of points out that as mowing height increases, depth of rooting, the higher you mow your grass, the deeper your roots are going to go. Now, the lower you mow your lawn, the more shallow your roots are going to be. There's a relationship there between how high you mow your lawn. And we know that time and again, lots of research has been done on that, specifically with cool season grasses. If you mow your lawn short, you're going to have more shallow roots. End of story. And that's why we make the recommendation, mow your lawn higher, because you have a lawn that's more drought resistant and is healthier just from mowing high. There's some other reasons too we'll talk about why we would mow it high. A couple words about clipping. There are limited situations where you would remove lawn clippings. If you have a problem with thatch, you might want to remove clippings because it's just going to add more organic matter that's going to add to that organic matter layer. And basically that's all thatch is organic matter that is depositing quicker than it's decomposing. That's all thatch is. In summary, that's all it is. So most of the time it's not an issue. If you have a disease, a lawn disease, you may particularly or specifically in some scenarios, you may want to remove those clippings. If you've had to go on vacation and your lawn's gotten really tall and you know that your lawn's going to get really clumpy and have big deposits after you mow, you may want to remove the clippings just that one time. Perfectly fine. Or if your lawn's also gotten tall, you've been on vacation and it gets really weedy, has a lot of weed seeds, you may want to remove your lawn clippings that one time. But here's some reasons not to remove your lawn clippings, or some of the pros of just letting those clippings stay on your lawn. But it's amazing that 20 to 40% of your grass's fertility needs can be met just by putting those clippings back on the lawn. That's significant, folks. Almost half of the fertilizer needs of that lawn could be met just by keeping clippings. Most people don't bag their clippings. I understand that. If you do, just take this into consideration. Loss of organic matter for building soil and make soil healthy, specifically with cool season lawns. It can really build your soil in any scenario that you're putting that organic matter back on there. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And it's just extra work and space and landfills. And we all know that's not a good thing. So in most situations, you just, leave your clippings on your lawn. That's the whole slide summary. A few facts about mowing. Once again, getting back to mowing height. There's some studies done. I forget if it's Penn State or who did this study, but looking at how do we come up with that don't remove more than a third of the grass at a time. How do we come up with that recommendation? This is some of the supporting information. We found out that if you remove, let's say, for example, 40% of the grass blade at one time, the root growth of that lawn grass is slowed, but it's not stopped. If you remove 50% of the leaf blade, 35% of the roots are finally growing after 33 days. So basically, a large portion of your roots stop growing for an entire month if you remove half of that grass blade at a time. It makes that big of a difference. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're not getting root development, your lawn's not going to be drought tolerant. It's not going to be able to tolerate diseases or insect damage as much. So keep that in mind. If you remove even a half of your leaf blade material at one time, a third of your roots don't do anything for a full month. Now, if you remove 90%, if you really remove most of the top growth for the rest of the season, for cool season grasses, there's no additional root development. Just stop for a minute and think about that. You remove, we're not going to do that. You know, maybe in an extreme situation for a specific purpose, maybe. But if you remove most of the top growth of the grass, there's no more root development that entire year. But that's where that's how we, one of the research trials that we use to base our recommendation on for mowing heights. This is some of the supporting information. Here's a case for keeping your mower blades sharp. Is that, let's look at the lower left here. And on the left, you have, you know, on the top there, you have two scenarios. You mow your grass, one on the left, upper left there is mowed with blades that were sharp. And on the right, you have dull blades that didn't do a good job cutting the lawn grass blades, the leaf surface, and they left tearing. Now, if we go back 48 hours after mowing, you can see down here that the lawn that was mowed with a sharp mower blade is growing, puts on a lot of top growth here, puts on like that much top growth. On the right here, this grass has been kind of shocked, and the mower blade was dull, and the plant is not growing much at all, even after 48 hours. What I wanted to show with that little graphic, and it's an older graphic, but I think it's a good one worth showing, is that if you use sharp mower blades, your grass not only grows faster, but it recovers faster. But another thing to point out is that I can tell a difference because I look for it now in lawns that have been mowed with dull mower blades, because they'll have a brown cast to them. And a lot of time people will see that brown cast and say, oh, I need to put on more nitrogen fertilizer. My lawn looks a little brown and it's April and my lawn should be nice and green. Well, the culprit for that brown cast to your lawn may not be the fact that you're lacking nitrogen. It may be the fact that your mower blades are dull and you get all of this tearing here, and the tips of every single grass blade, they're torn and they're brown, and they give the entire lawn a brown cast to it. So just kind of keep that in mind, that it's very, very beneficial to keep your mower blades sharp. In the past, I've only sharpened my mower blades once in the spring. Here in the past 4 or 5 years, I try to remember that mid-season around July, I'll sharpen my mower blades in the winter, and I'll sharpen again mid-summer to try to keep from stressing my lawn. Because remember, this is a program today about low input lawn care, and you can sharpen your mower blades, and believe it or not, that makes your lawn healthier and grow faster just by sharpening your mower blades. That doesn't have anything to do with the chemical or high impact lawn practice like irrigating. It's simply sharpening your mower blades. And if you look in the lower left here, you just get more healthy growth from that one practice. So don't discount the fact that, you know, it may be good to sharpen your mower blade a couple of times per year for a healthier lawn. Mowing height and season. Recent research just points to the fact of, in most situations, keep your mowing height, 3 to 4 inches year round for tall fescue lawns. There may be some situations you can drop your mower down a couple notches. Once again, if you've had an issue with diseases, you can mow a little bit lower in the fall, Or if you're doing something like removing dead leaves in the springtime, you may want to set your mowing deck down a couple notches, but just remember, do not forget to set that mowing height back up. That's why I'm careful about recommending setting the mowing height down for homeowners, because if you're like me, I'll set it down and forget to set it back up. The top point there is the most important, is that year round, just keep your mowing height high. This slide, I think, is just one of the most important of the whole presentation, and that's the effect of mowing height. Once again, something as easy as mowing height, that's not a chemical, it's more of a practice over a chemical, but the mowing height incidence, with crabgrass. So this study, I've tried to kind of abbreviate this whole complex study into one slide. Basically, they took an area that had some crabgrass and they mowed it at 2 different heights in this study to see what effect mowing height had on crabgrass pressure. When they mowed these 2 areas at, the one area, and then there was a control, of course, it was a study. They mowed one area that was at 4 inches, the recommended mowing height. They had no additional crabgrass pressure, 0 additional pressure. That was a baseline. They dropped the mower height down 1 inch to 3 inches, and they had roughly 10-12% more crabgrass. You can start to look at the chart here when they dropped it down to 2 inches, which is well below the recommended mowing height. If you go across, how much more crabgrass pressure did they have? 50-55% more. And at 1 inch, they had just a tremendous amount more crabgrass. The point I want to make with this slide is that if you want to do some weed control, mow your lawn at the proper mowing height, and that is one of the best forms of weed control is proper mowing height, because tall fescue lawns grow better, are healthier, have deeper roots if you mow at that 4 inches. A lot of us, it's not uncommon for me to run into folks that mow at 3 inches, because that's an average. 3 inches, I see that all the time in home lawns. We'll just remember that if you mow at 3 inches, you're going to have 10-15% more crabgrass than your neighbor who may mow at 4 inches. If all things are equal, which they rarely are, but if all things were equal, if you mowed at 3 inches versus 4 inches, you're going to have 10-15% more crabgrass, just because sunlight's going to get to the soil. Crabgrass is going to have an easier time of germinating, and your existing lawn grasses aren't going to be able to resist and outcompete crabgrass as easily if you were to mow at 4 inches. So an important concept for the presentation. We're going to speed up here a little bit because I know time is quickly running out. Nitrogen fertilizer, we have a great publication on fertilizing cool season lawns. If you want to know a lot more about fertilizing, that's AGR 212. You can look that up. You can specifically search for the title, Fertilizing Your Lawn, along with AGR-212, and you can find this, and it's got a lot of great information on different fertilizer sources and strategies to minimize your inputs. A little bit about fertilizer basics. My best management practices for managing fertility is that soil test at least every 3 to 5 years, 3 to 4 years if you're having issues, or if you're having issues every 2 to 3 years. Only apply phosphorus and potassium if it's indicated by a soil test. In other words, don't put additional inputs into the lawn that you don't need. Keep in mind that cheap fertilizers work as well as expensive ones when it comes to home lawns. A lot of times your custom fertilizers, they're designed to flow better through small spreaders, or they may have been modified to be safer if your lawn grass is wet. You won't experience any burn. But your cheaper lawn fertilizers, what sometimes we call ag fertilizers, are just as good as expensive fertilizers. Another thing to keep in mind is to be very careful about slinging fertilizers into the street, because you're slinging that fertilizer onto a solid surface, and that's going to run off target, but what normally would be a good thing is going to become a pollutant. A nutrient is going to become a very serious pollutant. If it gets onto a hard surface, it's not going to be able to penetrate into the soil. It's going to move into something like a storm drain or a roadway and into a ditch and accumulate and be a bad situation. Nitrogen timing, so very important on home lawns. I usually recommend only applying that in the fall of the year if you put a lot of nitrogen on in the spring and summer, you're not so much fertilizing your home lawn as you're fertilizing all of these weeds. Really important concept. If you fertilize a lot in the spring and summer and you don't have a really heavy herbicidal broadleaf weed grass and broadleaf weed control program, you're fertilizing all of these bad guys: crabgrass, foxtail, Johnson grass, nutsedge. You're actually fertilizing those more than you're fertilizing your cool season lawn. So basically apply most of your nitrogen or all of your nitrogen for a low input lawn. You put that on in the fall. And here's different maintenance levels out of one of our publications. Once again, that's AGR 212, different maintenance levels. And some lawns are maintained very high and you fertilize multiple times during the year. But for low input lawn, I recommend fertilizing one time in October, and we'll work with you on your fertilizer rates. But just for most general lawns, one application in October is fine. A few words about inorganic versus organic nitrogen fertilizers. I get more and more questions on that. Some pros of our inorganic fertilizers, or what we call inorganic synthetic fertilizers, is that they're inexpensive, they're readily available, and they're available in many formulations. Organic formulations have some specific considerations also. They're becoming more available. They're derived from materials like manure, sewage, sludge, organic waste that are certified if they're organically certified through OMRI or one of the other organizations. That's some of the ways that we get our organic fertilizers. The really important thing to remember if you're using an organic lawn fertilizer, remember I just told you to fertilize once in October for most low impact lawns. If you're using an organic fertilizer, fertilize earlier, because the way an organic fertilizer works is that it has to go through a microbial process to break that material down and make it available to plants, a process called mineralization. So microbes have to break that fertilizer down. Now, most microbes shut down around 50 degrees, a soil temperature of 50 degrees. Really important concept that I don't see stressed enough, specifically for those homeowners that are trying to be organic. If you have an organic lawn, put your nitrogen source down in August before the soil gets cool, because it takes longer for those nutrients to be converted and become available. Really, really important. White clover, won't talk a lot about this. I wanted to put the slide in. It can supply some nitrogen to your home lawn. Some people have strong feelings about white clover. Some people don't mind it being in their lawns at all. Some people do not want it in your lawn, but white clover can be put in there. It fixes nitrogen from the air, and as the roots of that white clover decompose, it releases that back into the soil, and it provides nitrogen. It basically takes materials out of the air, converts it to nitrogen, breaks down, and that becomes available to your lawn. So white clover does provide nitrogen, and it can be seeded late winter and early spring. If your philosophy is that green is good and anything that green is good in your lawn, then you may be a fan of white clover. I just wanted to put that in and a few considerations that if you're going to use white clover. In some cases, white clover can outcompete crabgrass, but it may not be so good at outcompeting weeds such as dandelion that are more taprooted, or plantains or plants like that. It may not outcompete those plants. Another thing that is interesting about white clover, and keep this in mind as your kids are out there playing, is that white clover green stains don't come out of clothes nearly as easily as stains from grass. That's kind of something that we stress with sports complexes, is that if you do have white clover, those stains probably, to be honest, are not coming out. It's a different material. The composition of the leaves are different, and it's interesting. Those stains don't come out of clothes generally. If you do have young children, white clover does attract bees, so you may want to keep that in mind. If you have a child specifically, or even you yourself allergic to bees, just be mindful that white clover does attract bees, which is normally a good thing, but you may need to be cautious with that. And here's just a home lawn that, be careful with drop top cedars. If you're not careful with your nitrogen applications, you'll see these dark green areas, and basically you can tell where the spreader was ran. Normally what I recommend for getting nitrogen into home lawns is a broadcast top spreader over a drop top spreader. Two basic types of spreaders: one that just sling the fertilizer material out in a fan pattern, and the other type is that It's just simply drops the fertilized material straight down. 2 types of spreaders. And be careful when fertilizing grass in shady areas. Sometimes you'll force that grass to produce top growth at the expense of roots. So fertilizing more heavily in shady areas is not recommended. A little bit about water management. If you find that you do have to irrigate, if you weigh the pros and cons of irrigation and you don't want to reseed in the fall because a portion of your grasses died, it may be that you want to irrigate. So I've provided some notes there. And it's easy to get a little rain meter now where you can set that out in your lawn if you're doing some irrigation, and it'll tell you how many inches you've gotten from that irrigation. They're little special cups that you can order for $1 or $2 and get those, and you can tell how much you need. But apply approximately 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week. If it's really, really dry, that can be very beneficial. Early morning, very early in the morning, if you're specifically if you're in subdivisions, the best time. You have low wind and low to no evaporation at that time period, and it's just very beneficial to do it early in the mornings. That's when you want to irrigate if you find that you have to irrigate. Just a chart that I included, that what is better if you do have to irrigate is to irrigate less often but more deeply. You want your lawn to be watered 4 to 5 inches deep at least, and that means using a lot of water at one time versus watering shallowly over many different times during the week, because your roots will be shallow. If you do shallow irrigation, your roots will be deep if you do deep irrigation, and deeper roots are better. Just remember, the roots follow the water. Drought tolerance, we already touched bases on. There are drought tolerance tall turf fescue species now. By its very nature, tall fescue is somewhat drought tolerant, but there's even better varieties that are out now. A little bit about your pre-herbicides and post-herbicides. This is where I wish that I missed being in person, because we all have different philosophies. And we're quickly running out of time here. I'll just touch bases very quickly on just some general thoughts about if you do have to use herbicides in your lawn, making those herbicides have the biggest impact on your lawn while using the least amount of herbicide. We have an excellent publication, AGR 208, that's called Weed Control for Kentucky Home Lawns. It has a wealth of just amazing good information in there. You'll want to look at that if you want to control weeds in your home lawn. But the best weed control for a home lawns, especially for the purpose of today, is a thick, healthy lawn. And that involves turf grass selection, the way you mow a lawn, the way you irrigate a lawn, the overall drainage of your soil. Remember, waterlogged soils leads to shallow roots. I think with a low input or an environmentally friendly lawn, I think you're going to be overseeding or thickening that lawn in the fall of the year, probably every 3 to 4 years for a lot of homeowners. And that's something we don't do, but that's just going to give your fescue lawn a competitive advantage. And our timing of fertilizer, a lot of this is in summary, our timing of fertilizer, and then to get a weed-free lawn, my last option for a weed-free lawn, my last option on the list is herbicides. You should manage all of these inputs here before you even consider a herbicide. Let's see. Some of this I just had as reference, and I'm going to stop with this slide. I wanted to kind of point out a few things with controlling, particularly broadleaf weeds in home lawns, is that if you do have to spot treat and you want to treat, you don't have to. Weeds may not bother you that much, but if you choose to use a herbicide in your home lawn, make it count by following these following practices. But most weeds are controlled with what we call three-way products. They have 3 active ingredients. Always remember, weeds need to be actively growing. If they're not actively growing, you're wasting your herbicide treatment. Keep in mind that herbicides can be liquid or granular. They each have their place If you do put down a granular, remember that the labels will point this out, be a good label reader. If you're going to use a granular herbicide product on a lawn, is to put that down after a rain or irrigation, because you need that leaf moisture to stick that material to the weed or target pest that you're trying to control. Always avoid spraying during high wind or imminent rainfall, because it can wash the active ingredient off and won't do a good job. The main thing is spot spray where possible. And my golden rule from our turf specialist on campus, they've said this time and again, is that if you're going to use a herbicide product and you want to get the most bang for your buck and to minimize your use of herbicides, is that put those on weeds that are small, because small actively growing weeds are easier to control. Otherwise, you may waste material, or you may have to put that material on multiple times, and that goes against your environmentally friendly, low input lawn. If you have to put these material on several times, it kind of defeats the purpose. I'm going to stop there because we're running short on time, and I'll make this presentation available. That if you want that, you can contact your local county extension office. But I guess at this point, Faye, if we have any questions, home lawns take a while to get through, and it takes a little longer to do over Zoom, and it's a tough one to do on Zoom because I can't get impact or feedback from the crowd. So the questions should be interesting if we have any, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. That was excellent, and always a good reminder for myself on all those points. So thank you so much. I'm seeing one question so far, and feel free to type some more in the chat or unmute yourself. But the first question was, is it okay to mow before morning dew has evaporated?
If you have to, that's fine. And I'll qualify that by saying, if you don't have any like red thread, which is a common thing that we see, or brown patch, if you don't have any obvious disease problems, you can mow then. If I had the choice to mow early while the dew was on versus mowing when it's 90 degrees, I'd probably still mow earlier. Just kind of keep in mind that that's going to add some maintenance to your mower probably as far as cleanup. But if you don't have any diseases present, I think the pros outweigh the cons, if that makes sense.
Yep.
We have another question from Greg, looks like. Greg, yes, absolutely. I recommend. That's one of my favorite tools, is a power seeder. And all a power seeder is, it's a piece of rental equipment that I think is the most important piece of lawn equipment that we can have in thickening our home lawns, because what they basically do is they make a split and they drop grass seed directly into that split. Now we say that you have to have good seed to soil contact for home grass seed, and you do. You can't just throw down grass seed on top of a somewhat thick home lawn and expect it to germinate. It'll never reach the soil level and be able to germinate. So what the slit seeders do is they overcome that issue by making a split and dropping the seed down into the soil to get good contact. So that is my favorite piece of lawn equipment, is what's called a slit seeder or a power seeder. And it's a rather expensive piece of equipment, but those are really common to find at rental places because they're such an important home lawn tool. But yes, that's the number one tool for renovating a lawn. And you can even seed a lawn with a power seeder from scratch. They're a great piece of equipment, and I really like those. I like to run those, me personally, every 3 to 4 years, because my lawn starts to get thin, spots die, and I just run those over the home lawn at the recommended rate. And they work great, and your grass will be thicker for it over time. Let's see, Faye, if there's any other questions.
I'm not seeing any other ones. So feel free to put any last minute questions or unmute yourself. But while we wait for that, thanks again, Ray, for presenting. And everyone, don't forget the next two Thursdays we have next up rain barrels, and then the following class will be on composting, and that kind of wraps us up for this webinar series, at least through the summer, and we'll reassess in the fall to see whether we're doing more in-person classes or continuing. We'll probably do a mix of some Zoom and in-person depending on the county. So thank you all for joining us for these sessions.